Oh. I would like to take this occasion to stress how useful, operationally useful it can be to see and to even qualify it, to even in a direct manner, just to think about the fact that 3D existence is in a quite real sense an aftershock, a simpler aftershock from unknown six-dimensional operations, as we've talked about the last several weeks with the fishbowl and etc., but just down to a mathematical that your mind, it doesn't matter that whether you can picture six dimensions. This is one of the few ideal maps that literally, for somebody attempting to do this, if you're attuned to it, can be of immediate value in a sense just thinking about it, as opposed to actually having, if you look at it as an ideal map, as opposed to actually having gone there. Put it crudely, or more verbally simplistic. For those, not ordinary people of course, because they would not be interested, but for certain people it can be of immediate use just to think about it in the sense, when I said before you've actually been there, even if you think about it, and I guess ordinary people would say that you don't fully comprehend it. You follow it? It's not like, well, yes, I wouldn't tear down the engine of my car, having just taken 2 night courses over here in Automobile Mechanics 101, that I won't try it yet. I would not try and deal with this until I comprehend it, until I understand what I'm doing. Which I wasn't going to stop here. I know that is quite common intellectual currency in the city, and it's all right. And here, something could be said about it. Not much, however, because the way it sounds is some sort of caution for somebody to think, well, wait a minute, I don't want to think plainly until I understand exactly what this is. You know, if you can try it somewhere, is do the mother. You know, don't sit around and say, well, I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. No. Hey, start a club. And you've been living in the city now for 20 or 30 or 60, 70, 40 years. So don't say, well, I'm not sure what I'm doing. I don't want to try and think plainly without fully knowing what I'm doing. Well, all right. Yeah. They'll be still trying to get the cobwebs off of you as they put you in the pine box then. But this is one of them that you can actually think about. But all of that having to do with the fact that your own intelligence can say, well, the story sounds interesting, the picturizations of the hand down the fishbowl, or even the idea that the three-dimensional world is a more simplistic outer region of what's going on in some unknown greater dimension. I'm saying 6 for the time being. And if what's happening there, unknown. Let's stress that right now. All these ordinary predictions and etc. we've mentioned, and maybe I'll draw your attention to it in another way tonight. But through three-dimensional minds, forget predictions. It is unknown operations. Let's say it's 6 dimensions. You can think of this without saying, well, yes, I suddenly fully comprehend it. I feel now at one with Buddha as he saw that tree, and it finally struck him, you know, what in the hell am I doing sitting on this tree forever? That it is this kind of moment of absolute enlightenment. It may not be that, but I am telling you it is one of the idea maps that is of immediate use to just try and think about the fact. Trust me for a second. Since I don't ever ask, nobody should trust anybody. For those of you who might be seeing this on tape and go, trust somebody, eh? Well, I've got a badge, all right? You don't. Or if you do, then I don't have one, and so we'll trust you. To just think about, because you can make some sense out of it. The sense makes sense. That this existence, so-called three-dimensional existence, you could think, you could take it, if you were really simple-minded, you could take it as being a theory, an idea. All right, I'll think about it. But to just try and think, with no exceptions, not just in some specific use, but that three-dimensional existence is a simplified, series of aftershocks of unknown six-dimensional operations. You can think that. You can remember that. And that's the end of the sentence. That's the end of the theory. No exceptions, no specifics of, well, you can do it here and you can do it there. That three-dimensional existence, three-dimensional life, three-dimensional awareness, three-dimensional consciousness, three-dimensional anything, you can think about as a theory, as an idea. You can think about all of it as being simplified, simpler aftershocks of unknown six-dimensional operations. Now, I say it can be of immediate use. First, consider it this way. Everybody is born kidnapped. Very specifically, you are born with your intellect already kidnapped, and it's kidnapped by unseen three-dimensional operatives. You can write that down. Now, I said that instead of saying gangsters because, well, just because. But your intellect is born already in the hands of three-dimensional operatives. Apples can never comprehend the captivity of an orchard. The intellect, operating within 3D limits, can never comprehend that it's being held, that it's kidnapped. It was born kidnapped. Apples not being able, in any manner, and I am speaking metaphorically for those of you with half a badge out there, in that they can never comprehend the captivity of the orchard. Let's put this into a proverb, a truism. Knowing somebody's hometown won't tell you much. Knowing somebody's hometown won't tell you anything other than where they're from. It's good to see the impact that a well-turned truism. See, I was hoping we'd just kind of slide through this and many of you would go, and we could go on. Everyone's 3D, three-dimensional intelligence is born kidnapped. All apples are born in an orchard. There is no way that the three-dimensional intellect can, in any useful manner, realize its inherent captivity, that it's kidnapped and it's being held by specific three-dimensional operatives. An apple cannot in any way ever comprehend. I mean, it's home, but to say, wait a minute, this is your own form of captivity, is not possible. But notice, ordinary intelligence throughout the years, poetic intelligence, and nowadays psychology, and religion played a part, but nowadays psychology, let me put it to you. When I said that knowing somebody's hometown won't tell you any more than where they're from, since that didn't get much more response than any of the other parts of this side trip, look at it this way. That, in spite of what ordinary psychology believes, and what many of you at the ordinary level believe, through no fault of psychology, that was just the way in which life put words and music to that particular energy tune going through humanity's nervous system. That is, they believe, and so do you at the ordinary level, that knowing somebody's hometown, you do understand, all of you apple bandits, that we are surely somewhere near the hamlet of metaphor, driving as fast as we can, trying to go ahead toward the great metropolitan area of symbolism. Ordinary psychology street level intelligence with all sophisticated people nowadays would say, if they had gotten anything from me saying, knowing somebody's hometown won't tell you much more than where they're from. Psychology and your old street level intelligence would go, oh, now I got you. You're wrong. Knowing where someone's come from, that's the clue to everything about them. Is that not true? How does everybody, not just professional psychologists, how does everyone attempt to explain now, and they did it in Homer's time, just a different way. How do the people explain the behavior of yourself, of anyone else? Well, you've got to know where they're from. That is, you have got to know the kind of background. Are you from our area? Are you of our religion? Did you grow up with two parents or a single household? Did you grow up as an orphan? Were you mistreated? You take in this information, and then you attempt, as ordinary life is supposed to in the city, that you formulate some sort of operational definition of this person. In other words, to say that knowing where somebody's hometown won't tell you anything, ordinary intelligence says that's not true. How are we going to understand if we have some 17-year-old kid is just today arrested, killing 14 people in his school? And the city is, those who are interested, aghast. How are you going to explain that? In this day and time when people do not necessarily believe that he has been onset by a whole band of some kind of satanic hell's angels took over his soul. No. People, a young kid like this does not suddenly stand up in the middle of school, pull out a semi-automatic weapon, and kill 14 of his... No. Let's get a little information. In other words, what's his hometown? Knowing somebody's hometown is not going to tell you any more than where they're from. If you're going to analyze an apple, worked for years, what would we finally find? Even a deranged apple. A dangerous apple. What are we going to finally discover? He came from an orchard. Oh, hey, let me write this down. He came from an orchard. In my hopeful holiday spirit, I begin to think and feel that some of you are getting closer to what we were talking about. That at the surface, not because they're wrong, because it is now part of the accepted wisdom of sophisticated consciousness and thinking, that to explain anything for those who no longer believe that the gods or predestination or just evil spirits are driving people, let's assume that, which is a fair assumption, in most Western, avant-garde, up-to-date cities, down at their street level, that is no longer the prevailing theory, except in dire emergencies. To understand human behavior, individually and collectively, but individually, to pick out somebody, if you're going to try in any way to understand the person, to analyze the person, to begin to get some insight into what makes people tick, you've got to know where they're from in a full symbolic sense. Knowing somebody's hometown is not going to tell you anything except where they're from. An apple. And finally, through all sorts of analysis, checking of records, interviewing some of his kin, perhaps finally, under some form of new drug that might be applicable to a Red Delicious, if not a Granny Smith, the apple finally itself admits, I'm from an orchard. And the city wisdom goes, aha! Now we're getting somewhere. The 3D intellect, if it could be analyzed back far enough, and something would finally break, I guess they call it in psychiatry, analysis, a breakthrough. That the little intellect, the little apple, after years of analysis and spending its money, spending money that could have been applied in to the economy with Pearl Brewers of Dallas, Texas, or somebody. They spend it on analysis. Finally, after years of laying there, the little apple turning brown and getting wrinkled, dried out. I mean the intellect. And it cries and tries to hold back, and it finally blurts out, "All right, I'm from 3 dimensions." No. And the psychiatrist, that is, life, that aspect of the city incident, goes, "Aha!" Apples come, or this apple came from an orchard, and this guy's mind, what was it? His intellect came from the 3 dimensions. Ha ha! This kind of information, we're getting somewhere now, folks. Knowing someone's hometown will tell you where they're from. There's no doubt about that. Beyond that, oh, I'm sorry. Beyond that, it'll tell you 5 things. Oh, we don't have time to go into it. They'll tell you where they're from, where they're from, where they're from, where they're from. If you're born kidnapped, which I was implying that all apples, intelligence, are born and is already kidnapped by these 3-dimensional operatives, what if it gets rescued in some way? Or what if the kidnappers beat it? What if the kidnappers have nothing better to do? And they decide, let's torture this intellect, this kid we got. Let's beat him. Just for the hell of it, and find out where he's from. Where's he from? Where's the best he's ever going to know he's from? So he turns to the orchard. The kidnappers. And he says, well, I'm from here. And the orchard, the kidnappers go, "Ha! Kid, we can even play worse. Don't play around with us. We won't know where you're from." What's he going to say? There is no doubt, if you know someone's hometown, you know where they're from. Boy, that's the kind of information, finally, we're getting somewhere that somebody can use. I will assume that everyone understands this is not an attack on psychiatry or the good apple growers or anybody. It is simply the limitations that the 3-dimensional intellect cannot explain anything outside the orchard. Nothing. That's capital N. Perhaps you'll find this an interesting aspect of what life has done in this regard. Since men are not driven to think about this directly, as always, they are driven to think about it, you might say indirectly. That is, they get drift off aftershock energy, or else I wouldn't be talking about it. That's not the end of it. And no one would hear any of it. So someone can hear a little bit. But look at such things as religion, the obvious one, but another good one is astrology and religion. Well, I say religion, specifically the idea of external gods. Can you see that it's life's crude attempt, thus I should say, it's man's crude attempt, to bring into verbal focus the fact that something is driving the 3D world other than the 3D world. That is exactly, let's go to astrology for a minute and say just God. Because it's exactly, if you can see it, as old as astrology has been, it's exactly them trying, in a very crude way, is the best life will let people do it, to try and explain why an apple is in the orchard, why it's in a particular tree. Because it is taken now, all right, away from the planet Earth. So we got enough problems down here, an astrologer would say. Some of what's going on is being influenced, either directly or indirectly, to a way that we must take into account, is being influenced by some stuff up here, out there. You know, maybe I'm not whining about it yet, but I'm just telling you, we people should take this into account. The planets and stuff, all these cosmic forces that right here, not way off a billion light years away, we can't comprehend that. But even you simple-minded, non-astrology folks, you know that there are planets here. You can see them with a little microscope or stamp on your toes with a flashlight and you can see some of them. And they've got to have some influence. What are they saying? It is life. And that kind of drip-down energy, that kind of aftershock, in a crude way, is laying this kind of energy out, and then men, crudely, hadn't improved that much over 5,000 or 6,000 years. It's either that or God's, or now, where are you from? Psychology. But you understand, it is an attempt, very crudely, but very specifically, to explain, to try and explain the fact that everybody's got this vague sensation if it's pointed out. Enough energy trickles to point out to them that, all right, we're here in a 3D world, and as that famous psychiatrist or philosopher said, you know, here in the 3D world, shit happens. Everybody goes, yeah. But what's driving the 3D world is something more than the 3D world. And of course, religious people go, yeah. Or people in a religious mode, there's temporarily will go, yeah. That's something. It's these outside gods. Astrology says, all right, it's what's going on out there. It's the simple planetary, physical influences out there. It's driving, at least it's influencing this. How can you say it's not? The thing about all of that is that the attempted explanations still are operating within the confines of 3D intelligence. And therefore the explanations that the planets are gods somewhere away from here, up in heavens or hiding out there in the darkest space that we can't see them, that is still being pictured, still being thought, still being placed literally in the nervous system within the confines of three-dimensional space. And thus these explanations are non-explanations. They are ordinary, run-of-the-mill, episodic, conclusion-laden, conclusion-oriented thought that, if you heard for the first time the theory of astrology, and somebody said, well, the planets up here, they know that they have gravitational pull on each other. I mean, look at our moon, it's being held here. The planets are these huge things, and we know about the laws of gravity, magnetism. Well, I'm telling you, if you've never heard of this, those planets, they get in certain places and they influence people. Large groups of people, they influence us individually. And if you didn't never heard that before and you were an ordinary person, you might go, wow, that is, I always thought something strange because sometimes I can't tell my brother or my mother act a certain way, or sometimes I feel just suddenly, go, ugh. I think, why'd I do that? And they say, well, it's that. But now think, if you could jump from being this ordinary person being the first time exposed to the theory of astrology. Then we can go from that to you being somewhat extraordinary, a would-be revolutionist. Then you got to realize this. It literally, not somebody's opinion, it literally explains nothing because it's still taking that which is occurring in your orchard in the 3D world, and all you did was move it and say, well, the forces are out there, some thousands of miles away. And people go, oh, well, that explains a lot. What does that explain? That would be like telling an apple that an apple is saying, I sometimes feel inexplicably depressed. And an apple astrologer says, you know why? And he comes up with some kind of orchard version of astrology, but instead of planets and stuff, which is asking a lot from the apple's intelligence, he starts saying, there are trees out there. Some of them way down there. Can you see them? The apple goes, yeah, just barely. He said, those trees, you know that you look around here, some of the apples, sometimes they'll fall and they hit the ground. There's a thing, right quick, he comes up with a theory of gravity. So the apple says, yeah, and the apple astrologer says, all right. That same kind of thing happens, but beyond what we can immediately, or what we normally perceive. These trees down there, that way down there, can you see? And the apple goes, yeah. He said, one way, yeah. Those trees are exerting the same kind of influence just from a distance, and we don't normally think of it. And they affect us. They can make you feel depressed. or unexpectedly giddy. And the apple goes, wow. But why does it go, wow? All they've done, but now listen, it is so cute. All they've done instead of the apple astrologer or priest, but the apple astrologer, instead of saying, you know why you're depressed? You see that tree right there, right next to us? You know, he goes, how can I miss it? It's almost touching me. That tree and those apples up here, oh yeah, I know those guys. It's them making you depressed. Now, of course, they can come up if it's something specifically happened, like one of the apples up here looked at me and says, you know, hold on to that kind of skin. Maybe it'll come back in style next year. And so this one apple says, well, you know, that made me depressed. Not that. Remember I said, let's start out, the apple feels inexplicably depressed. Because as long as you can blame it on somebody, you can always, you know, stuff you. But the apple, the astrologer says, if the apple tried to say, well, it's got to be people around me. Everybody's already heard that. All of humanity, in a sense, is immune to that. But it sounds different. Instead of saying, well, it's the apples right here make you at times depressed and you just don't realize it. The apple might go, well, you know, you can't say no, but I would suggest to you that the astrologer probably couldn't collect much of a big fee of taking the apple and say, well, he listened to him, you know, yeah, you're depressed, maybe examines his little apple handwriting, maybe he's a graphologist on the side. And if he says, well, it's all these apples and other trees around here, they exert kind of invisible influences, gravity and some other stuff, and that's what caused it. And the apple might go, oh yeah, that's interesting. But again, I suggest that were you that apple, which you have been already, you wouldn't think, wow, boy, I'm glad I met this astrologer. Because most of that, you would go, oh, so what? But you remove it within 3 dimensions. All you got to do is remove it spatially. To say, well, instead of people all around you, and here in the neighborhood, and those tall buildings, especially the mountains, ooh, they exert influences. Where was you going to get with that in the city? With ordinary people. Not even now, but thousands of years ago. People might go, well, that could be true. But if you say, all right, what you're describing, those kind of unexpected, inexplicable mood swings, some of the mass insanities of people, and you go, and you point to the heavens, either to a God, or you point to something visible, the planets. And people go, wow, now that could be. You have not said any more than to say that that parking meter next to your house is doing it. Because you are still within 3 dimensions. It is still an apple astrologer, an apple priest trying to explain to an apple that there are influences that he never suspected. And almost everybody will go, hey, I'm available for that because the ones I suspected don't seem to explain anything. So he said, all right, it's the unexpected. But what do? They just point further away than the person ever looked. And that's taken as being mystical, metaphysical, the word itself. Metaphysical, beyond the physical. Where do they get? Look in the dictionary. Yes, metaphysical. Boy, oh yes. That's heavy. Where do they point metaphysical? Well, it's a long way off. You mean that tree out in my backyard is not a metaphysical force in my life? Oh, no. No. Boy, you know, that's a good thing you met me. You thought that like that tree? Well, I'm just wondering. Oh, no. But here's what they say. No, not that. But there's a tree floating around about 40 billion miles from here. That tree, when it gets right in line with this parking meter that's floating over here, then, and people go, huh, that could be. You are still within the framework, the confines of the 3-dimensional world. Your explanation is. There's no way to win anybody or convert you. You either see this or not. No human that you ever heard of, or anything you've ever done, none of the verbal, historical, written currency in the city describing things metaphysical, religiously or otherwise, all the way from astrology to absolute notions of gods. None of them explain any more. None of them are freed from any more than saying, when they say metaphysical, all they're doing is still within 3 dimensions. Nobody has ever described anything beyond 3 dimensions. They even make up words. for the lack. They don't see it that way, but omnipresent. Or they say God is metaphysical. The word itself, the attempts to say, well, our God is beyond sensual, or is beyond verbal explanation. They don't see this, but some of you by now surely can. What they're saying by the definition is, we can't go any further. They don't see it that way. They would say, you're getting confused. What we're saying is that you can't ordinarily see it, and that's why we're saying that it's indescribable. They're not saying it's indescribable. It's that astrologer telling the apple, look way down there. You never looked that far, have you? Or he comes up with a little apple telescope, and the guy goes, and he says, it's those trees down there. That's God. That's astrology. But it's still within the three-dimensional framework. They got no choice. Nobody's ordinary intellect, nobody's poetic musings, nobody's written history has ever gone beyond that. Never, never, never. Did I say never? Never. It's not a theory. If you're attuned to this, all you got to do is think right quick yourself. And you realize nobody has ever done it. That all the attempts, but of course by then you should be able to see the beauty. It's a kind of crude beauty, but there's nothing wrong with that. Especially anybody, you women who's ever gone out with a healthy bricklayer, or a man who's gone out with a waitress at a truck stop. Don't write me. You didn't even get it, did you? Never mind. There's nothing wrong with crude beauty. But see, such as astrology, even if you never believed in it, or forget believe in it, but to hear that, wait a minute, what's going on in my immediate 3D world? What's driving the 3D world? It seems so strange. People can't understand it. Philosophers, your minister, your rabbi, they all go, Then to hear, of course religion says the reason we can't is because God's in charge, or the gods and the anti-gods are fighting off somewhere. We got to pay the price. Or they're fighting somewhere, and the somewhere is here. The battleground is our soul, and they're fighting, and it's all confusion. But then to hear, astrology, that yes, the 3D world, just ordinary existence, is by and large confusing. That's for those people who didn't know the word inexplicable. I hate to use it 3 times in a row because, never mind because. So they say life is confusing, but here's why. What's driving the visible world, the 3-dimensional world, is not what you see. This is what I've been looking for. What is it? But notice, they cannot go beyond the 3-dimensional world. All they can do is try and turn their attention and yours. It's not a trick, because they're as fooled as you are. All they're doing is go, well, we can't just stick right here to this crude, carnal, physical life. We got to look somewhere else. You go, yeah, tell me. We got to look way off. And everybody looks. But understand, it's way off. It's 3 dimensions. They hadn't gone anywhere. You're huddled down in the corner of a closet. You feel like the spiders are getting on you. You wish what was going on, and suddenly an astrologer, a priest, a philosopher, somebody shows up and says, you think you got it bad over here in the corner? The reason is, it's not your fault, and it's not the people here immediately. What is it? It's astrology, or it's the gods. And what do? They point up to a faraway corner there in the closet that you never looked up there. There is what's causing it. You're still in the closet. It is no explanation. All it is at the city, as much as any episodic explanation is. You are forever a captive. You're born into the captivity of 3D gangsters, operatives, and there's no way to know it. There's no way to know it, and life continues to allow these little crude bits of energy to drip out, wherein they come up with the ideas of gods, of astrology, that at first blush, and for last blush to many people in the city, it does seem to be an explanation. Because as long as you can look away somewhere that you never looked, you mean the planets? Those little bitty things? That's what does it. Then it's kind of like you can, literally, in your mind, kind of write it down like, and maybe file it away, and it seems as though, well, when I need it, I'll think about it that way. But it explains nothing, because it's still within the confines, the absolute, undeniable confines of the 3D world. The mind born into the orchard, the mind born into being held captive of 3-dimensional operatives, there's nothing you can do to it. You can beat it, tickle it, trick it, give it drugs, stand on its head, spin it around, and then, of course, finally, point way off to the far end of the closet and say, there's forces out there. Even if you didn't name them, if you just said, we're not sure what the forces are, but there are forces out there. If you had somebody that tried to be some kind of up-to-date non-specified astrologer or priest that said, wait a minute, I don't believe in astrology, I don't believe in any kind of religions, no offense to them, but forget putting names on it. Let's don't limit ourselves to calling it astrology or some god or some organized religion. You go, yeah, I'm up to date. And he says, my theory is, it's simply unknown forces. I mean, the forces are obviously there, right? You go, yeah, I mean, they got to be. I can't understand what the hell's going on. I can't understand what's going on with me. They're unknown forces. Let's do not be so crude as our forefathers and limit ourselves to a god or an Allah or an astrology. Let's just, for the time being, let's just call it unseen forces or maybe X forces. You go, I like that. I can live with that. It's the same friggin' thing. All you did was point away from right where you're standing. The trees right around you and say, well, we can't understand from the available information, from looking at these apples, these people, these mountains, these trees in our backyard. It does not seem to explain why things are as they are. Right, yeah. So rather than call it anything, gods or planets, let's call it faraway forces. I like that. Talking about kidnapping. Have we got time for an aside? Oh, all right. I was thinking, does anybody remember the story, The Ransom of Red Chief? It was these couple of small-time hoods kidnapped this little kid out in some rural area at the turn of the century, I think, from the story. And they held him. And the kid was just an absolute, he called himself Red Chief, the best I recall. He made them kidnappers. And they were just a little, 7 or 8 year old nipper, and so they were not necessarily those with mayhem in mind. They just wanted some money. And the kid was just a pain in the ass just the first hour or so. But they slept back in darkness, and they put a note there in the mailbox of the farmhouse of the family that they kidnapped. And they picked out it was some big farmer there about that they wanted $200 to return him, and leave it here tomorrow night. And they went back tomorrow night and nothing. And by then, those of you that don't know the story, this kid is driving them absolutely nuts, and even begins to harm them. And he's making them jump through hoops, and they got to call him Chief Red, whatever it was, Chief Red Chief or whatever. He's making them call him certain things. They got to stay on their head. They got to make secret signals, or he won't even talk to them. He won't eat. So then they wait. The second night, they leave a note in there, and they demand $100. The next night, nothing. Then they go back and they put down, like $10. And finally, there's the fourth or fifth night they show up, and there's a note, and they're overjoyed, and they grab it, and they run back to their hideout, and it opens up, and it's from the Chief Red Chief, or whatever his name is, his old man, and he says if they'll leave $50 back in his mailbox, he'll take the kid back. He'll come get him. That was the story of Chief Red Chief. I was going to ask, since I thought about that and talking about kidnapping, could any of you see that it might be possible that in a way that you could bamboozle, even innocuously annoy the 3D operatives into whose clutches we're all born, to where they might finally let you go? Well, we've got to be, well, for the sake of any children that might see this tape, or any of you who might actually live on a farm at the turn of the century, I don't. You can't harm the kidnappers, because that, people try that. All of you have been through that, being a rebel, sticking out your tongue at life, dropping your pants in front of a church, wearing a beret and shades at night, and trying to be hip while everybody else was hip, and then catch up and try to be hip, and then everybody was hip. Not that. That's why I say it would be a form of innocuously annoying them, your kidnappers, through such things, how about this, as thinking backwards. Remember that one? Or through plain talk. But I was going to suggest there's a way in which you could play out the story of the ransom of Red Chief, because you got to know that you are born kidnapped here. And it might be possible. Perhaps some of this is beyond maniacal. Perhaps part of this is subconscious. Started to say subterranean, subliminal. Of course, that's according to some of your people's minds are still in the pits. Hence, an information of how you might begin to kind of bamboozle and innocuously, remember, harmlessly, begin to annoy the kidnappers of city intelligence, where you were born. And they might of course, it don't do any good unless you know you're kidnapped. I might be kidnapped, but there is an answer. Yeah, where is it? Well, it's out there. The salvation from captivity in the closet is what? And all religious and right-thinking people on the planet stood up. Salvation, released from the closet, will come through the power of what? And everyone says, the closet. Of course, I know they got synonyms for it. Some people call it this, and some people, but they're all saying the closet. I was born in a Buick, but my salvation lies where? And they all go, if you could translate, all people, all races, all religions, they all say, a Buick. Right. Something is negatively impacting my life, saith the wine sap. And the astrologer says, it's right there. And he looks. He says, where? And he says, way off. It's the orchard's fault. But the apple can never see. Well, wait a minute. I was born in the orchard. It is, may I suggest, still an immediately useful map of just thinking of, just trying to continually think of, because there's nothing to say otherwise, even if you say, well, to me it's still kind of a theory, it's an interesting map. It's okay. There's nothing to tell you otherwise, it's not going to harm you, but to try and continually think that this is, it could be, if I just made all this up, it could be that this existence, the 3D existence, is simply aftershocks of unknown 6-dimensional operations going on. But even a little more specifically, I was going to say, if you tried to picture life itself, as we've already mentioned before, as a living creature, like a viable empire itself, a kingdom, the Roman Empire, a living creature, life itself, and that is continually trying to expand itself through, if it was just a living creature, through its extremities, if it was a kingdom, through its outer regions and territories. That's where everything grows. The Roman Empire, just to use one example, anything. If it's going to expand, the little country of Germany, I shouldn't have said that, now they're back together. But the Roman Empire, if it's going to expand, where does it expand? It doesn't expand wherever, if we're going to map out the Roman Empire around the good old classical heyday of it, around the Mediterranean, it doesn't expand there. A human body, a living creature, if you looked at life as a creature or as some sort of living empire, it grows at its extremities. A tree, but an empire. It grows at the outlying territories. If it's going to expand, it's got no choice. You can't sit there in Rome and go, well, Caesar and Assistant Caesar, they sit around and say, well, what we need to do, because probably he heard somebody at General Motors say this one time, that you either got to grow or die. And Assistant Caesar go, yeah, let's expand. Well, they can sit there forever there within the palace there in Rome and go, but if the empire is going to expand, it is in the outer regions. That's what expansion is. In the 3-dimensional world, there is no choice. A living creature is the same way, if that was life. Consider life growing, and specifically in this case, through the outer regions, consider, as much as we can do this 3-dimensionally, verbally, through man. But also consider that this same scenario the reality of it, not just theoretically, but the operational reality of it is played out in a more simplified manner, in a partial manner. It is played out in man, to look at you individual now as being a living creature, of course, as being an empire. But where do you grow? Where are the outlining regions? Here. But here specifically. It's not here physically, because there is no such thing as deep squats or bench presses for the brain. I know people think you can exercise the brain. People in the city do. It is not physical. So how's the brain growing? The brain, of course, does not grow. Then how do the operations of the brain go? How do the operations of the empire grow? That's a good question. Now, while man's physical, somatic, as opposed to, well, his somatic empire is, all in all, a three-dimensional creature with all its inherent limitations. Everybody, Buddha, astrologers, Sufi sales, Boog Powell, James Brown, well, maybe not James, but everybody, three-dimensionally, you're here. You're stuck, and no matter who you are, no matter what your name is, no matter where you stand, somatically, let's forget this into the empire, just you physically, you are as tied to the limitations of a three-dimensional existence, literally, as a dog, as an earthworm. That's no big secret. So where is the possible expansion of the empire? Now, it's obviously here, although it's not physical. So more specifically, what makes it possible to grow? What makes it possible, in any sense, for this empire to expand in man? That is, not just life expanding, not just the Roman Empire in its outer regions, but an individual person being able to. That is, life's empire growing through an individual person. The possible expansion is in the intellect being able to, in a real sense, touch a new dimension, the fourth dimension, time. That is the expansion of the individual nervous system empire of all humans, all ordinary, middle of the bell curve, sane humans on this planet at all times, is this. It is only the human intellect in the three-dimensional universe that can touch, that can conceive of time. There's nothing strange about this. When I say touch. A bicep will never conceive of time. I do not care how developed. You can do anything you want to with a bicep. And it will never, and it will get bigger. No doubt about it. You can make your muscles bigger. It will never get any closer to another dimension, because it can only get bigger spatially. There's no difference insofar as you being able to grow in any meaningful way, any way outside beyond the city level, street level. There is no way to grow in the three-dimensional world except what? Spatially. In the same way, well, wait, we got to explain why things are not explainable here in the three-dimensional world. That's what we have you for, priest, astrologer, and I will do my duties. Yes, we cannot explain things here. And what are they about to do? They're about to make their bicep bigger. They're about to attempt to move the explanation to expand. They'll say, well, we're going to expand your consciousness. It's a good thing, King, that you appointed me court astrologer, because, watch it, hold on to your brain, because I'm about to expand your consciousness. And the king says, fine. The people say, fine. What's he about to do? He's about to pump a little iron. He's going to move the human intellect in three dimensions. He's going to tell the king, it's the planets making us do it, or it's the gods making us do it. Where are they? Well, they're not here. They're way off. Ah. You can expand spatially, but so what? Nothing wrong with building up your muscle if that's what you wanted, but you do understand that no matter how big you make your muscle become, it's a three-dimensional, it's a spatial expansion. It all happens within three dimensions. There's only one thing that can begin to move to another dimension. It's this. singularly in man, it can begin to move and expand in the outer territories. And the reason I bring this up is if you need another way to see the usefulness, if you're attuned to seeing this, I was thinking about life, the three-dimensional life, as being aftershocks of unknown six-dimensional operations. If you need it, to put it this way, I'll put it to you crudely, here is the proof if you can hear it. Strong evidence that you're living with it. Everybody's living with it. That all ordinary explanations, all ordinary operations of the human intellect are spatial. Even while people know, if it was put to them this way, that, wait a minute, we're the only creatures, I could probably get ordinary people to agree with this, we're the only creatures on this planet that we know of that has any conception of time. Baboons, anything, the closest thing genetically to humans, they cannot conceive of time. They can conceive of space. You can teach a baboon to jump in a place he's never done. You can teach him to stand. You can teach him to do all kinds of spatial things. For all I know, you get a chimpanzee to take up weightlifting. Thinking back to some of the gyms I've been in, I wouldn't... Well, never mind. Don't write me from a damn gym. You could get creatures in the 3D world to do things that might seem to be new to them. And you could say, wait a minute, I got a chimpanzee now that will mash buttons to get food. He has to mash a whole series of buttons. I keep changing them. And plus he has to stand up. Plus he has to pick up a barbell and do this. And a chimpanzee, he'll do that to get food. So what? I'm just an interesting trick maybe. But you understand that is still spatial expansion at best. Spatial change. Because you can't get outside the closet. No matter how big you make this, it will never conceive of what this can. Specifically, time. So I could get them to agree, they wouldn't see the point, that it's only the human, and it's only human intelligence, not any aspect of the human somatic system, the physical body, has any conception of time. It's this and only this. It is the place that the human organism, the human nervous system, is most directly connected to Rome, in the sense of the Roman Empire. It is the closest connection to the seat of power of the living empire of life. Is this. Nothing else. Forget hearts and souls and this. And as I said, if you want to look at it as a kind of evidence, which is not the point, of course, but it's a good way to help you fold and unfold the map of trying to think about three-dimensional existence as being cruder, simpler aftershocks of unknown six-dimensional operations, is the fact that here is the absolute evidence of it. It's going on now. It has been going on for thousands of years with humans. It's going on now. This, in a real sense, is touching. It's overlapping. It is the place that goes around the corner from 3 dimensions into 4 dimensions. Time. Not the brain, but it being able to conceive of time. Because even as you know, physics and people, just everyday conversation nowadays will say, well, we live in 4 dimensions, or that time is the 4th dimension. Bricklayers, carpenters say things like that nowadays. This is almost part of common, I started to say wisdom, language. But nobody stops to think about it in this way. They're not supposed to, but you are, everybody. But to know it is a different matter, to think about it. This is where 3 dimensions turns a corner into 4 dimensions. It's right here, and you're tied to it. That's why I keep saying this is not a matter of proof in any way or evidence, none of this. But there it is, you're living with it. That although you're stuck here, no matter how big and strong you get, no matter how fat you get, no matter how skinny you get, no matter how many no jobs you get, and et cetera, all that's fine. But for real revolutionists, they understand, boy, this is not getting me any closer than it ever was. It's here. And so would-be revolution, you can go, well, it's got to be, you're right. But it's not then a matter of, well, isn't that an interesting theory? It's not a theory because you, everybody, but you are already tied to a place that can go around the corner. Because an awareness of time might as well be, if you consider a child's building block, and there it is 3 dimensions with a known 3 spatial dimensions, then we can't, of course, describe spatial in another dimension because it's no longer spatial. But if it would be that you went across the block and you off in another direction, that is what time would be. It is outside of space. It is outside 3 dimensions. And everybody's got the ability, you're tied there. This wouldn't be going on. I couldn't talk about it. This brings up one more thing right quick that we were mentioning. You recall we were talking last time about the 2 groups that you could describe as being the defenders of the past, the home guard, of which everybody is a member, as opposed to, or in comparison to, the friends of the future. And I know we mentioned something that sounded a little strange, probably. It'd only be the friends of the future, or the friends of the future would be the only ones that would actually be limited to their future being in the future. Because at the ordinary level, ordinary intelligence, in a sense, I've got to make it fast now, it dreams. Life makes it think about the future. And so that compensates for not actually experiencing it. In the same way of saying, well, I'll tell you why life is inexplicable, is because of forces out there. The stars, the planets, or the gods. People go, oh, I like that. You understand? It meant nothing, in a sense. And so they didn't experience it, but it was like the imagination of it, the map of it, and people go, oh, okay, all right. Now, I got to go cut the grass, but I feel better. So their future, at that level, ordinary intelligence's future does not actually lie in the future. It lies in the telling. It lies in the spatial description, still limited to it, about what the future may be. Or a priest or an astrologer saying, well, I felt the bumps on your head, and I know when you were born. I'm going to tell you, you're in for some good times ahead and some bad times. And you go, well, I feel good, thank you. That is the extent of it. But for somebody, a revolutionist, whatever that is, somebody attuned to this kind of stuff, the only place their future lies is actually in the future. It's why now this other stuff will do. Not because it's wrong, not because you're mad at it, but no other 3-dimensional explanation will do. Because if your future is actually only in the future, then you cannot take the descriptions, the episodic, non-explanatory explanations, and take them as being experienced. You don't theorize it, you've just been through it all and it doesn't work. The only way you can then, if you're going to pursue that sort of thing, the only way you'll ever experience the future is you can't dream about it, you can't take an explanation of it, you got to actually take your intellect that's already in touch with time to the 4th dimension, and you got to actually take the thing into the future. That's it. That's why it was said that for a revolutionist alone, does the future actually lie in the future? Because everybody else's future, in a sense, lies here. That is describing the future. Well, things are going to be better for you. That's one future. Another future is, well, when you die, since you have been a good boy and you've been a good Jew or Christian or whatever, when you die, you're going to go to a whole new place and everything will be real dandy. If you go, oh, I feel much better. Now I'll go cut the grass. That's their future. So ordinary intelligence's future does not actually lie in the future. It lies right now. It is only somebody tied up in some kind of subversive wiring and chemical maelstrom that is tied, like everybody else, to the future, but they understand if I don't get there, I got no future. We'll discuss this at some future time.